welcome everyone. This is Rashmi from Recro. First of all, thank you so much for joining us in the Saturday evening. I hope you guys are doing well and staying safe. A quick introduction about myself. I am a community manager at Recro, wherein I'm working towards building an exclusive community for developers like yourself who can connect with like-minded people, build your network, and grow professionally. Those who are joining us for the first time and don't know what Recro is and what do we do, a quick intro about Recro. We are a developer-centric platform helping developers meet right opportunity by connecting them with fast-growing startups such as CureFit, Udan, Swiggy, Dunzo, etc. So welcome again to Recro Talks, and today we are going to talk about JavaScript, and we are all set to answer your questions. So we have an amazing panel with us today. Let me quickly introduce all our panelists for everyone, starting with Charlie Gerard. Charlie is joining us first of all from France, and she is a senior front-end developer, a Google developers expert in web technologies, and the author of the book about TensorFlow.js. In her spare time, she explores the field of human-computer interactions and builds side projects using machine learning, AR, VR, hardware, and creative coding. Thank you so much, Charlie, for joining us. You may go ahead and say hi to the audience.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Yeah, it's really good to be here and to talk about JavaScript. Yeah.
Awesome. Next, we have Ankush with us. Ankush is a software engineer at Amazon. He's currently working on Amazon One in Seattle office. He's also the founder and coach at Real Dev Squad, where he trains software developers and college students to be better engineers and work for great companies. Ankush.
Hey, everybody. Thanks, Rashmi, for the introduction. We're excited to be here.
Next, we have Parminder Singh with us. Parminder Singh is a self-taught UI UX developer and designer. He has worked with startups like Flipkart, Swiggy, etc. He loves to create rich user experience using modern web technologies and trends. Parminder.
Thanks, Rashmi, for the introduction. Hi, guys. I'm really excited to discuss about the questions you might have you've posted, and hope to answer all of them. Thank you.
Last but not the least, we have NC Patro with us. He is our kind host for today's session. NC is a engineer, mentor, public speaker, and technical blogger as well. He's having 10 plus years of industry experience of building softwares. He's running a meetup group called JavaScript Meetup Bangalore, which has close to 9,000 members. He is doing quite well in terms of community, and thank you so much, NC, for joining us and hosting us today's session.
Hey, thank you, Rashmi, for the beautiful introduction. And I'm really glad to be part of this discussion on JavaScript.
So thank you so much to all the panelists once again for joining us and taking out the time. I'm sure it is going to be insightful discussion with JavaScript folks joining us.
So we'll get started. So before that, welcome everyone to this panel discussion on JavaScript, which is a beautiful language we all know. So before diving deep to our discussions and debates, it may happen. So I'd like to thank Recro and Rashmi for organizing this and bringing all of us together so that we can talk and discuss on JavaScript and for the community. So before we'll go deep started on the question, so what I'll do, I like to start with Charlie, and maybe I want to understand your journey with JavaScript, like how it gets started.
I don't have a background in computer science. I learned to code in a boot camp. So this is where I started learning JavaScript. And at the time, we started with vanilla JavaScript, so like no frameworks. And then we moved on to using AngularJS. That was the really big trend at the time. And then over the years, I moved to React because that's what then became the trend and is still mostly the trend. But that's kind of been my journey in terms of like front-end JavaScript, but I've also used Node.js both on my job and on side projects. So I've really liked to explore how to use JavaScript a bit everywhere. Also like controlling robots with JavaScript and machine learning with JavaScript. So I'm definitely a JS fan. And every time that I can try to use it in a different way, I try to explore that. So that's kind of like very quickly, that's my journey with JavaScript.
Awesome. I love the part like JavaScript everywhere. Like you won't be exposed.
Definitely.
That's great to hear. Yeah, Ankush, like if you want to talk about few lines, your journey with JavaScript.
I had a very rocky start with JavaScript. I remember going from my college days into just straight on building a startup, trying to like pick up frameworks on the fly, trying to do backend, trying to like manage a lot of things. And somewhere down the line, maybe a confusion between Java and JavaScript somehow leaked into my projects, where I remember like things not working the way I was expecting them to. This was back in about 2014, 15, and I had to like sit down and like understand how JavaScript was like very different from any other OOPS languages that I had like experience with before. So I started off with doing the framework route first and then diving into the language, but I would not recommend that to a lot of people.
Awesome. So that's the takeaway. I mean, don't jump to the frameworks. Hey, Param, you want to share like how it gets started for you with JavaScript?
Sure. I mean, I had a really nice, really lovely journey with JavaScript. I started off with Angular 1 because that was the only thing available at that time, along with Backbone.js and Ember. And prior to that, I was working on jQuery, hoping that, it's going to be the future of web development, jQuery that was launched in 2006. So as you can tell, we are in 2021 and JavaScript is something that's so dynamic. There's entirely new, different versions coming on every year. And within that period of, 2014 to 2017, we have all seen how JavaScript has evolved. New framework has come in, and what you're working on today might not matter tomorrow. So you have to keep yourself updated. So yeah, it's been a very interesting journey with JavaScript. And I really love JavaScript for its versatility. Not only you can build web, you can build mobile, you name it, IoT, and AI, ML, anything you can do with it. So I really love JavaScript. Yeah.
Cool. Keep yourself updated.
Yeah.
Cool. So with this, I think this is the good start, and everyone has a very interesting journey. So I'll just share mine, and before we begin, so I have started my programming career with programming C. And then there is a JavaScript switch happened, and I felt love with JavaScript, and then I started learning JavaScript. I started contributing on the front end, then slowly moved to the back end, Node.js, stuff like that, and then with the mobile application JavaScript. So I've tried multiple flavors of JavaScript with my last, I think, 7 to 8 years working with JavaScript. And then I always believe on sharing with the community. So yeah, that's how I get connected with the JavaScript meetup, where we hosted a lot of meetups so that we can help the community to learn and share on JavaScript. And that's the key focus. And we have done a lot of boot camps and things like that. And that's how my journey has started and going on with JavaScript. So with this, so we'll start. So Ankush, I think, so the first question what I have, right, and I see a lot of time the new developers or developers who are moving to JavaScript, they have a confusion between ECMAscript and JavaScript. So what's your take on this? Like how to see these two together?
Right. If you're a new developer, like I would say ECMAscript, the specs which are there, you may not have to worry too much about it just yet. Like, learn JavaScript as a language first, learn the paradigm very well, and then worry about like what are the deep level discussion that are happening in the spec world, and slowly and consistently jump into it. Like, don't try to do everything upfront, because then you'll just overload yourself, make too many mistakes, waste a lot of time. So start with maybe something a little simpler like MDN docs, or maybe like you don't know JavaScript book series. Learn them very well, and then use them in your day-to-day as you start like building up on your knowledge about the spec itself.
Superb. Yeah, that's a cool thing. But still saying that if people want to know like what exactly the ECMAscript is and how it is related to JavaScript, like what's the answer for them?
I can answer it if you want.
Sure, Param. Yeah.
So ECMAscript is a specification of the language. So ECMAscript defines like how does, for example, the triple equal to operator would behave. And JavaScript is an implementation of that specification. So similarly, there existed in the past, or maybe it exists right now, there's something called as ActionScript, which is popularized by Adobe Flash. So that language is also based on the ECMAscript specification. So ECMAscript is like a parent specification, and JavaScript is the concrete implementation of that specification. So yes, you need to learn JavaScript, but if you are stuck, if you want to understand the deeper mechanisms of how a certain thing behaves in Java, you need to look at the specification for deeper understanding. So that's the difference between the two.
Hey, Charlie, so I think you have a very deep journey with the JavaScript. So let's say an engineer who wants to contribute to the spec, like, is there a way like an engineer can contribute to the ECMAscript spec? Like how?
I've never tried. I think, isn't there is the W3C group part of trying to put these specs together? I know that in general, when it comes to contributing to a language, there is a way to contribute to it, but I'm not part of the W3C group, so I'm not sure. But I think that in general, a lot of the specs are on GitHub as well, and you can kind of like read and be part of discussions and propose some edits, things like that. It usually looks quite scary to be a part of this, but it's something I'm actually interested in doing. So even if you have the answer to this question, feel free to like share it. But it's something I was looking.
The idea
into
of this
well.
is, yeah, like you like, do you feel like anything which you don't like in JavaScript, which you recommend to change, or you see, everything is there is a purpose behind it?
Yeah,
I wouldn't. Yeah.
So yeah, following up on that, so it's TC39 that defines that takes a lot of proposals, and those proposals are in 4 stages: stage 0, stage 1, stage 2, stage 3. So for example, proposal for decorators came in, and that committee didn't move it forward. So it got, stunted at like stage 1. And these days we don't have decorators in JavaScript. So I believe we as developers, we don't have much control. It's the TC39 committee that has more control on it. Yeah.
So you can't do it than anything. You just have to use it as it is.
Well, that's not 100% true, right? We have all the transpilers that give us all the new features that we want.
Yeah.
And then that basically boils down to JavaScript, which we then use in the browser. So we as developers do have choices. And that's what using all the frameworks and all the new Babel transforms are all about, right?
Yeah.
Cool. I think you bring a new good point on framework, right? And then with the current state of JavaScript or the current ecosystem of JavaScript, there are like tons of frameworks to choose from. Obviously, there are some frameworks which are popular, but when you're starting something, like how a developer should decide like which framework I should go for?
Well, I have a few ideas. One of them is that when you're starting with frameworks, take a look at what the market is currently going after, right? Like a framework is just a tool like anything else, and nothing stops you from learning multiple frameworks if you had to. So start off with maybe a list of 2 or 3 that you see being popular, or you can see being popular in a year or 2, because if you're learning something, might as well make yourself ready for the industry. And, from there on, see what sticks around, learn things. Like you can never go wrong with learning new things. But again, like Param, I think mentioned before, and like all of us agree, learn the language really well before like worrying about frameworks.
Yes, absolutely. I agree with Ankush. As he mentioned, it's very important to learn the fundamentals, because I've seen people who are like, oh, I don't know JavaScript, but I know React. So that's something really surprising. And talking about frameworks, so I would say there's no one size fits all kind of scenario. So you might want to work on a really huge enterprise product. And it's always good to have some sort of, opinionated things in the mix. So for example, I believe Angular 2 or Angular 4, Angular 10 nowadays, it's really good for those kind of scenarios where you have a great, huge team and you have a lot of modules. And on the other hand, if you want to build something really quickly, and of course, it's easier, the community size also matters. So React has a really good community. You can find everything so easily, every component. GitHub issues are there, which are already resolved. So React is a very good choice for that. And everybody has their own personal favorite. My personal favorite is Vue.js, because it's more closer to the web components. And but sadly, it's not very well adopted by a lot of companies and community. So yeah, it all depends on the nature of the product and the stage of the company it is at the moment.
So Charlie, like, would you like to add something, like how you guys take anything like you do as a pre-stage before, let's say, you're starting application and you need to decide, okay, which framework and tool I should go with. Like, is there any like pre-step for that which you guys follow in general?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you have a bit of an idea of how, well, it depends if you want to do like a side project or a really like a project for your job, because if you want to do build a side project, I think you can use one of the very new framework and you can use that to kind of learn about this framework in like a low risk environment, because the side project will be your own. But for work, I agree with the part around the community size, because, and also like how, like the features, is it a fully featured framework? Because if you start growing your app and then you realize that there's something you need that the framework doesn't support, you don't want it to be stopping the evolution of the product that you're building, because you have to wait for the team to implement that feature in the framework. I wouldn't be surprised if that happened to a few people who were like, oh, well, that feature is not supported in framework X, like what do we do now? But there's also the thing around like some frameworks kind of like die over time as well. So making sure that whatever you go with is, you can then at some point migrate it to another framework. I mean, like that's kind of like a bigger discussion that usually happens over time. But I have worked on migrations of projects from Angular to React, and you kind of have to like rewrite in the new syntax, and you want to make sure that the features that you need are supported in both frameworks. But it's difficult to know when you start a project, because you never really know like how far something you're building is going to go. But at least, yeah, around features and community size, to make sure that at least there's some support around, and you're not going to end up with something half done, like you're going to have to migrate too early.
So do you see in future, like people are migrating from React to X, and what that X will be?
I wish I knew, then I would be learning that already. But I mean, a lot of people are interested in frameworks like Svelte. And lately I've been looking at Solid around frameworks that don't really use the virtual DOM. And I'm wondering if people maybe are going to look more into that, because sometimes I think people are building their project with React when React might not be needed for what they actually want to build. I mean, for side projects, I use vanilla JS because it's just like, I don't want to configure stuff. I just want to build what I'm trying to build. But yeah, for work projects at the moment at Netlify, we're using React, and I think our docs site was in Vue. But yeah, I'm wondering if people are gonna maybe move away from the virtual DOM to kind of like a no virtual DOM kind of framework. But I'm not sure. That's something I'm exploring at the moment, but we'll see. I'm interested in what other people have to say though.
Yeah. So any wild thoughts on this, Parminder and Ankush? I know, I mean, there is no concrete answer to this. I mean, it's just about the feeling. Like Svelte, right? If I just talk about Svelte, like web component, which is like getting popularized, right? So what's your thought, Parminder, on this? Like, did you get chance to learn on it?
Yeah, the time I tried Svelte, I was really, impressed by it. But what I found was that it can't be used for production level projects at that moment. Now the situation might have changed, and there might be some adoption by the community. But yes, it is closer to what Vue is trying to do. And but again, it has some proprietary kind of syntax into it. It needs to be compiled into JavaScript. And while Vue, on the other hand, is just there in the form of pure JavaScript. So I believe the learning curve is lesser over there. But yes, I'm open to new frameworks, and I loved it when I used it for the first time. But right now, I think it's a bit changed.
So Ankush, like, do you see like there is any end of learning this framework, or it will be there every year?
It'll be there.
Every year, every week is more like it. Yeah, but one thing that I'd encourage people to think about, I think like Charlie touched on that, is also thinking about the sustainability of your product as one of the parameters when picking up the framework. A framework that's evolving and a framework that is getting the regular updates, a framework where the contributors are concerned and careful about the migration of versions, because you don't, like, everybody remembers Angular 1 to Angular 2 story, right? Breaking changes, rewrite code. It like I had my startup on Angular 1, and it was a nightmare trying to decide if I want to rewrite everything to move to Angular 2, or I want to stuck with all the issues and stay with Angular 1. So you don't want to get boxed into that kind of a problem. So think about sustainability of your product as you pick up a framework, and just don't pick up everything because it's cool. Wait for the community to see it, let some pros and cons, like let the experts fight it out, and you can then just like go in and like do your final decision making and figure something out there. But nothing changes overnight, right? Like it's a gradual scale. Like as Svelte is coming, as Vue is becoming more popular, it's not like everybody's using React today and all of a sudden tomorrow people decide Vue should be used. It's a scale. So wait it out, see how it goes, and use whatever you have up till now and write good code. Then worry about what is the new hot framework that maybe you should jump to.
I have a really a similar story since we are touching about Angular 1 to Angular 2 kind of thing. React was really popular, and it's the time I'm talking about, December 2016. Angular 2 had just came out as a release candidate. And I was like, okay, you have an app in Angular 1, like a product that was built over like 2 years. And it was really slow. They were using jQuery in between, and it was just messed up. So I proposed, let's do a revamp in Angular 2. And there were a lot of problems we faced. And firstly, in terms of there were no components at all. There was just like a material library that was being built at that time. And we had to end up, building the components like multi-select checkbox and whatnot. So it was difficult for the first project that we did, because of course there was a team of front-end developers who didn't know Angular 2, and Angular 2 had not only Angular 2, but also things like TypeScript, RxJS, and it was just a lot for everybody to just get onboarded. So it's difficult, but as we did our first project, it was a really tight deadline, so we had to manage somehow. But as we did another project and 3 projects in the span of 1 year, and in the end, we started seeing very good value out of it. So the Angular 2, is very opinionated in terms of how you manage your modules, and that worked out really well for a big enterprise kind of project. So yeah, there are hiccups in the beginning, and it's always a good idea to wait for the experts and community to do it. But we are also part of the community, so maybe we can also build and do some open source contribution. Otherwise, we'll see the fate of Vue.js, what's happening at the moment. So.
Looks like Angular 1 has given a lot more nightmare to all of us. So we'll move out of Angular then. So we'll go to JavaScript as a backend language, right? So Charlie, you have mentioned like you have explored JavaScript in backend application also, but what you're feeling like what's the adoption actually JavaScript as a backend language?
I haven't done it in a few years now, so I wouldn't really know right now. I know that at first there was some skepticism around like, should that be in production? But then a few years ago, I did work for like a big financial application back in Australia, and we were writing the backend in Node. But since then, I went from like full stack to more front end, so I wouldn't have the updated like use of Node.js in the backend. I know that at Netlify, the backend is in Ruby, which also at some point people were like moving away from, but that's what we're still using. So,
so Ankush, you would like to add anything like the JavaScript's adoption at the backend as a language?
What JavaScript is used for backend as well? No, just kidding. I'm very excited about the prospects of Deno. I think it solves a lot of problems that Node.js had. And it just goes to show that people really care about these things. Adoption is there. And the beauty is learning one language very well to do your front end and back end helps a lot of people, like especially companies, like hire a set of experts and reuse them in both the scenarios. So at the very least, from like a startup perspective or from like economics, it works out really well. And once you have your initial product, as you grow, then you can obviously like look into other languages and other experts of, whatever frameworks and whatever tools and languages you want to go with. But it really helps to like get a lot of companies start off with their initial version of the tech product.
So, Param, I have an interesting question for you. I know
Okay.
JavaScript. Can I call myself as a full stack developer?
Yes, you can. Partially, because so JavaScript is just a language, but for being a full stack developer, you need to understand, a lot more things, because in order to build an app, it's not just JavaScript that you need APIs, you need to understand about web security, you need to understand about styling the web application, which is, I believe, more painful than developing the business logic. Like one step of getting towards full stack development. And if you learn the bigger, broader picture, you'll be able to build the application end to end. You can rely on, for even if you don't want to do backend, you can rely on some cloud services like Firebase, like using platform as a service, so that the API part is taken care of by that. And you can focus more on HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Or if you're using React Native, some way of, you need to learn way of styling in React Native. So yeah, JavaScript nowadays is being used in both front end and back end. So you can, of course, benefit from that. But yes, there are more things to do besides just learning JavaScript to become a full stack developer. Yeah.
Yeah. Just because you can like buy groceries from the shop doesn't mean you automatically become a chef, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Good example. I love that. So, Charlie, so I know you are a big advocate of TensorFlow JS. You have written a cool book on that. So do you feel like JS has matured to get its own place in ML and AI world?
So to me, the interesting thing with being able to do machine learning in JavaScript is that it can give the opportunity to JavaScript developers to learn about machine learning without having to, on top of that, learn another language. But also, if you want to build if you want to have machine learning on the web, then what better language than having JavaScript, right? So I think Python obviously still has like a huge place in machine learning. It does depend what you want to build, but nothing stops you from training a machine learning model using Python, but then you can load it in JavaScript and use TensorFlow JS with the model that you trained in Python. So I think that there are opportunities to use both. I think to me, it's really exciting to like make a space in the JavaScript ecosystem for machine learning, so that then it's like another space where JavaScript can be a part of, on top of what I was saying earlier with like hardware or all of that stuff. It's that you can be a JavaScript developer and maybe by day you're doing mainly front end, but then on the side you can learn all of the other things of the tech ecosystem in general. But yes, I haven't built a production application that was using JavaScript, but I built lots of side projects, and JavaScript allowed me to enter that space and explore it and learn more, which means that if I wanted to then build a production application, I would have to, like, knowing what I want to do in JavaScript, I would only have to learn how to write it in Python, but the logic would kind of be the same. I would gather my data, organize it, train my model. I don't want to take too much time on this, but I do see a space where, if you want to build a website that uses machine learning, then JavaScript is the best language, but you can still, Python, I think, is probably still used the most. But I love the accessibility that it gives us.
Cool. So you mentioned about a lot of side projects, what you have been working on. Like what's the motivation behind all those side projects apart from your regular deliverables for your company?
Yeah, I think it's the learning. I love learning new things, even if I know I won't use them at work. I think, actually, I never know. Sometimes I learn something on the side project, and then years later, I realize it's useful on the job. But it's more around having a broader understanding of the JavaScript ecosystem, of what is possible, especially working for a startup. Sometimes you're not only a dev, you also come up with new ideas for the product. So to me, exploring as much as I can what is going on in the ecosystem and in tech in general is what motivates me. I love building things, seeing what's possible. And also, as things change so fast, I don't know if I'll be a JavaScript developer in 10 years. Maybe I'll have moved on to something else. So I'd rather be ready,
Yeah. Cool. Ankush, I know it's like you guide to a lot of young engineers, right, in real dev squad. So how you suggest the engineers? Like there are a lot, right? Let's say when I start learning JavaScript, there is a JavaScript front-end development, JavaScript back-end development, now JavaScript uh, into the machine learning. So how one should take this and learn this?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. I think the first thing you have to do is figure out why do you want to learn. Without the right motivation, without the right North Star, learning anything is almost useless because you're not going to do it enough. You're not going to stick around when, the going gets tough. So you need to first figure out what is it that you're looking for and then start learning JavaScript or web or whatever it is. And now if you're going to learn, then I think there are enough like material out there. And that's one of the problems because you have so much noise. So be like good people who are in the same journey as you so that you form your little cohort and, work together and like challenge each other as you learn. The other thing is hobby projects are cool, but I think one of the things I've noticed with hobby projects, especially with a lot of younger devs, they take up hobby projects that they already know how to do. And that restricts their learning because they don't challenge themselves to build something more complicated. So I would say like when you are, just going around regular web, if you see some cool feature, like you go to Twitter, you click the heart, you see like nice little sparkles coming out of it. So maybe challenge yourself and say, okay, can I replicate that behavior? Can I like figure out how they did it? And then work your way backwards from there and like slowly build up on your knowledge there. But like I said, to start off, like, go to MDN, they have enough like learning paths there. You can pick one, get started, but have one or two cool products that you want to build out. And last point I would add is don't build hobby projects for the sake of it. Build a hobby project that you can put up on production, manage it, deploy it, learn about how your code reaches a user and get actual users using it, especially those not from your network, because they'll give you good feedback and real feedback. Your friends will always say, yeah, this is fun. This looks good. A real user will say, this is like BS. Yeah. Like I can't find anything here. And that's where the real learning is going to come from. So build something, deploy it and give it to actual people. Even if you give it to a handful, 20, 25, build a cool utility, build a small tool, build a small form that like does something interesting. And then your users will ask for more features and that'll keep you growing.
Superb. I think, I like that part. I mean, there has to be some motto and the real user for it, right? So we'll just switch our gear and we'll jump to mobile because we have seen a lot of time the big companies, their approach is mobile first development, right? So Param, I want to understand, like, do you see a JS or the JavaScript has played a bigger role in mobile application development also?
I mean, I have seen, I've seen at Flipkart how they used to work. They used to have a React Native team for some of the modules, but for a quality level application, you need to have some sort of hybrid approach wherein they have like proper Android and iOS teams, but they were powering some of the screens with React Native. So with React Native and other similar frameworks, there's always some sort of compromise. You can't do some very intense level things with it. There must be ways around, like a hybrid kind of approach, as I mentioned. But I believe if you are chasing some of the very native application features on a native platform kind of features, it's always a good idea to learn iOS, Swift on that platform properly, and using Java and Kotlin on the Android side of things. So yes, but that being said, the main benefit that comes from it is that you can use JavaScript, and that is what helping me in my next role. So I have been a web developer throughout my whole career, and right now in my next role, I'm jumping onto a React Native role, and I don't think it'll be very difficult for me. It's going to be a learning from me, and as it's very similar to what React is, what JSX is, so it won't be very different. So that's one benefit of it. And a lot of companies that have adopted it, I've seen, and especially the companies, the requirement is like, okay, we don't want to invest in managing like two different teams, two different developers, Android and iOS. It's always difficult. Rather, compared to a developer who knows JavaScript or TypeScript and who can work either on the front end, either on the back end, now also on the mobile side. So it's like the best of all the worlds. So that's a really cool thing about JavaScript, that, as I mentioned, it's so versatile.
Awesome. So with this mobile, one more topic came into, that's PWA, right? Which is again a very hot keyword. So Charlie, like, have you got any exposure to working on a PWA, or do you see like PWA has the capability to, even we don't have a mobile app dedicated?
I haven't built one, and I don't even think I've even installed one. I think it's the type of things where I don't really like downloading apps. So if brands, like, unless there's like a real need to have it as an app, I'd rather people do like build PWAs. But because in general, even the apps that I install, like, for example, well, I have the Twitter PWA. That's the only one I have. But that's exactly where I don't think it needs to be an app, or maybe to send you more notifications. But like, I don't want that. So, but otherwise, I would be more a fan of PWAs. But then they sometimes you just don't have access to the same functionalities, so that would make sense. But at some point people were talking a lot about PWAs, and I actually don't think I've seen that many websites that were telling me like, hey, you can install me. Like, I don't actually think I've seen that many, or maybe I'm not visiting the right websites, but yeah.
So Ankush, what's your take on this? Like PWA versus your native app versus your hybrid app? A lot of choices now, right?
The thing I like about PWA and the thing I like about web in general is it's accessible to everybody. Native apps, they get locked into the app store policies. A lot gets controlled. The pipes, are maintained by the respective providers. PWA is like slowly bridging the gap between like native and, like Charlie said, right? Some things don't require an app, but they're still good to like have in your phone. So I love the idea of PWA being able to like have quick icons, click them and just go and use them almost like a native app. Like it's getting pretty close. Like if you've used some of the recent PWAs, like Twitter being one of them, the experience is pretty fluid, and it's only going to get better from here. Apart from that, like in countries which have a lot of issues with, let's say, the internet connection, having a PWA that can like do a lot of these, background syncing for you, it can maintain cache and like quickly get you to your stuff. Like I can totally see myself using a Google Doc and not having to like worry, and which, by the way, already happens on the browser. But if I have similar apps which I can install locally onto my desktop and use them like regular apps, that will help me even more, where I don't have to worry about things like my network connection if I'm on a train or a bus or just in a bad spot, and continue being productive. It helps take away that mental burden. So like I'm going to switch a lot of our website components into PWAs and see how they work. So little excited about that.
Yeah, I'd like to add that I'm a big fan of PWAs. I've worked on one of the projects at Swiggy, and it was a mobile first application. And I tried to mimic its performance and interactions with what a native app would look like. It was difficult. And what I'd like to say is it's very easy to get things wrong trying to mimic that behavior, because as soon as something is wrong, it becomes really visible, and people will say, oh yes, this is why we need a native app. So there's a lot you can do with service workers these days. You can have like queue of events. If you are on the underground or tube, you're performing some action, you can queue your actions up, and as soon as you get the network, like push a new version. It's you can get closer, as Ankush mentioned, to a native experience, but it has to be done in a very careful way. So yes, but and I love the fact that Android is supporting it, but sadly on iOS is big pain because they have stopped supporting it. And ironically, iPhone was the one who came up with the idea of having an app icon, and now they have due to recent changes they have stopped supporting it. So sadly, on iOS front, it's not very well supported, but yet on Android, it is working really well. And there's something called as TWA, the Trusted Web Activities, that has come up recently. There were talks about it using at Flipkart. So again, it was a hybrid kind of approach. But yes, there's a lot you can do with PWAs to make it closer to. The best thing is that you don't need to learn a native application code base in order to bring that experience. So yes, it's one of the benefits that web offers to you.
Cool. I think with this one thing which Ankush has called out also, and you, right, the performance, right? So if we don't do the performance, so now there are a lot of talk on performance. So being a developer, right, like how I should learn and apply those performance thing, like how I can do better my application from tomorrow compared to today. Like what's the approach? Because a lot learn JavaScript, I learn HTML, I learn CSS, but when it talk to web performance, I mean, still things are not very open, right? So how to take this like in a learning and applying journey?
Yes. First of all, the first thing you need to do as a developer is to learn the style guide. Whatever framework you are using, Angular has a beautiful style guide, and I love that. Love Angular for that. And likewise, React and any other framework you choose would have that. Okay, don't create style component inside the render method, let's say, because it'll have a memory footprint. Try to memorize things which are going to change very frequently and have an impact on the child components, etc., etc. So once you have done that step and your application is live in the testing phase, in the QA phase, or even on prod, you need to run the auditing. You need to understand what is it that's causing problem in order to solve it. So you need to audit it well. You need to see how the application is behaving during the scroll performance. If something is really just something heavy handlers happening, there can be multiple, reasons your application is slow or not performant. So mostly when we say the application is not performant is when the user is trying to perform an interaction and it gets stuck. So it gets stuck because JavaScript is single threaded. It means that the UI thread is blocked on something that's running, and so there could be some animation that's kind of blocking due to some other thing that's running in the background. So you need to make sure what is it that's blocking the problem. It could be a very intensive event handler, for example. I've seen it in corporate projects on the scroll event, so there are ways around where you have debounce, you have throttle and all that. And there could be multiple re-renders happening, that's one of the bad things you don't want to get into. So yeah, you need to audit it, and then there are like numerous things which can go wrong, and you need to fix that. Yeah.
So Ankush, like during the project planning, like what feature versus performance, like get weightage?
Yeah, I think before that, with regard to performance, I would be very interested to hear Charlie's views on performance, since Netlify is like such a good company that focuses so much on delivering amazing content, amazing CDN, amazing like websites to the users. So just if we could quickly like talk to Charlie about it.
Sure, yeah, we'll hear from Charlie.
Yeah. Well, I don't even know where to start. For me, in terms of performance for the UI, what I wish we had done before, but we didn't really, is to do like regular audits, but also have, Parminder mentioned audits, but also having some kind of a performance budget. So every time that you're adding a dependency to your project, that you don't want your bundle size to go over a certain size. And it's the type of things that you usually don't think about at first, because you want to ship something fast and your product is growing and you have to ship new features. So you don't always think about the performance at first, because when there's not that much code at the beginning, it's like, it's fast enough. And there's a moment where you start to realize it when it starts to be a bit too late. And then you have to like retroactively like figure out what went wrong. And you have to, like, I think we realized that we had packages that we're actually not using in the code base. Like we had removed code, but we had not removed the package that we're actually importing. So we could remove that to make our bundle size smaller. There were some times where we were importing a package, and then we realized, well, this package is just a function that we could rewrite ourselves. So we could write our own util instead of importing a package, like a little Lodash function that we actually could do by ourselves. But there's also everything around eliminating dead code, minification, and all of these things. So I know that this year we worked on making our UI more performant, because we realized that we had not done it before. So there's a few different things. Then on the back end, I wouldn't know, but I probably should ask the backend team and learn a bit more about that. But I know that on the UI, it's been an effort that we've worked on this year, and that we'll keep doing this. But there's different strategies, and definitely auditing and having a performance budget is something that I wish I had done before. But yeah.
Yeah, Patro, I'm going to hijack this for quick two more things I would like to add here,
Sure.
especially for the people who are starting off in this field. One is that you will very rarely get to like build projects from scratch. Most of the time, you'll be thrown into existing code bases.
Yeah.
Learn debugging tools really well. Like your browser has amazing set of developer tools. Learn what every tab does, why it exists, what are the things that you can like do from it. Like that will like start surfacing a lot of problems that are already there in the code. And then the second thing is learn how the browser operates and how your code actually goes from being a code in a repository to all the way to your user and their device. Like what are the steps? Like if there is a CDN, why is it there? You know, if there's a CI/CD pipeline, what does it mean? Why does it exist? What is testing? Like think of every component and like learn it as well as you can when you're starting out. It'll go a long way. Then you start getting into like the things which seniors and experts are doing, but at least like know what is happening with your code. And for that, like developer tools is extremely important.
Cool. I think we'll take some questions from our audience also. I see there are a lot of questions which has been posted. Charlie, there are questions to you on CSS. So what's the future of SaaS CSS libraries like Tailwind, Bootstrap, and a lot of CSS libraries? So how you see the future of CSS having a lot of libraries?
I'm going to say the classic thing of it depends. Because for us at Netlify, we started moving from basically like global CSS everywhere. Again, that was not refactored for years, to using utility first with Tailwind. But this has also, we've had a lot of issues with this because we've been working with a lot of legacy code. But then we've had so many conversations around like, should we have CSS in JS, or should we stay with Tailwind, or should we just like leave it as it is? And I think I can't really say what the future will be because it's so dependent on what is already there when you join. You can't really do whatever you want. I think if we restarted Netlify from scratch, we would have definitely made a different decision. But as Ankush was saying, you usually join a project that is there with a lot of legacy code, and I think it is interesting conversations to decide what kind of CSS strategy you're gonna use. I can't say what the future will be, because you would have told me a year ago that I would be writing Tailwind. I would have been like, no way, I'm not writing Tailwind. But now I'm like, well, for what we have, it actually works. Actually, I was a bit disgusted at first, but now I understand that for certain applications and in certain architectures, and with working with what you have, it can actually be a good solution. So I think it's maybe one tip as well, is that sometimes you think that a tool kind of feels weird to use, but giving it a try, and that's what we did. For a couple of weeks, we were like, okay, let's try to convert a component, give it a try, and learn the pros and cons from there. And we did that with all different types of writing CSS before we made our decision to Tailwind. So can't tell you about the future, but can definitely tell you that it's a lot of work, but it's actually interesting to go in these conversations about how to write your CSS, because it can very easily become something very difficult to work with.
So Ankush, I think this question for you. I'm a fresher learning PHP now. I want to make career in JavaScript. PHP and JavaScript, like how should I take it?
In my personal opinion, stay away from PHP. Focus most of your initial energy on learning JavaScript, and maybe like go with a language like Java, since Java is pretty prevalent in the industry. Like a lot of companies still use it. They have existing projects. And if you really want to have that extra rockstar factor, maybe pick up something like Go, and position yourself maybe just as a beginner in Go, but like knowing the basics. I would stay clear of PHP for now. if that helps. But yes, JavaScript do that really, really well. Like focus maybe like 80-90% of your time. Maybe 90 is too much. Maybe 80% of your time on JavaScript.
Okay, so I think there is one interesting question. So I think Param, you can take it. So it's by Arvind. Yesterday, I came across a concept called call by sharing in JavaScript, and it felt like all my life was a lie of what I knew about JavaScript notations. So how you actually handle these things when you feel like you know the JavaScript better, and someday okay, this is something which I never knew and I claim myself I know JavaScript, right? So how you take this thing?
Yes, I mean, JavaScript is such a huge language. Even I, after so many years of working on JavaScript, even I can tell I don't know JavaScript fully. There are still a lot of features. So it's like, that 80-20% of percent rule, like you use 20% of the things actually, and rest of it, you might not end up using. So for example, very few companies, there are very few instances where you might have used ES symbols or, ESX proxies. So these are the things, that make up to the interview questions, sometimes, but not actually you'll end up using them. So yes, the JavaScript is, there exists something called as the quirks of JavaScript. Like there are like insane behaviors of JavaScript which you don't know about. So yes, but the same is true that I would say don't get discouraged with that, because it is a quirky language, and the way it has been. It has evolved from the beginning through Netscape. There was a lot of stuff going in between. So yeah, right now, for example, we aren't using JavaScript at all. We are using TypeScript to build our applications and then compile to JavaScript. So it's going to be full of surprises, but that's how it is.
Have you seen that image which shows like JavaScript reference being like this fat of a book, and then JavaScript good parts being like a very small.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The good parts, but I love the good parts.
Yeah, but I think the author of You Don't Know Jay is like, he doesn't like that. There are bad parts also.
Yeah, he Kyle Simpson. He's a great guy. Yeah.
So I think with the TypeScript, it's remind me, and I would like to hear from Charlie, like what her views are. Like, should I learn TypeScript, or is it like TypeScript I can just learn TypeScript and it should be good? I don't have to know JavaScript, because the tools and the compilers, everybody can take care of the rest of the things.
Actually, we're starting to also add TypeScript to the Netlify front-end code base. And to me, I wouldn't learn it. I would always start with JavaScript, but I don't know, some people are really like TypeScript fans, but I don't think I know somebody who started with TypeScript without knowing a bit of JavaScript first. To me, I still haven't written any TypeScript, and my career is not over yet. So I think it's like sometimes you have these tools that people get really like intense about, like you should know, like now TypeScript is like taking over or something like that. But I believe that it would be easier for me to start learning TypeScript because I know JavaScript. I don't know if the opposite would be the same, but I'm interested in hearing what people have to say. I don't think you would start with TypeScript right away.
Ankush, like you want to add something over here? It's interesting, right? So
yeah, I'm still like forming my opinions about it. I've picked up TypeScript within the last like 1 year. I feel I think somewhere down the line, people got confused between JavaScript and Java. So they said, okay, let's bring all the type system of Java into JavaScript. And they're like now a superset of the language. But it really helps. Like I have prevented a lot of bugs, and I have seen a lot of bugs happening in production systems because of the lack of type checking in JavaScript, which I feel could have been like eliminated so much sooner in the cycle, could have saved so much dev effort, so much time, so much user experience just because of it existing. But then it adds this extra overhead of having to learn it and having to understand what it's doing before you start littering any's everywhere and moving forward with it. So I am kind of still divided, but I would say it's a good thing to learn for sure, or at least good thing to start with. So you can do good understanding of JavaScript, and then some understanding of why TypeScript on top of it, so that you can extend from it when needed.
Okay, so there is one interesting question, Ankush. I think I'll want your view on that. So someone is saying, Kiran, I started learning JS a month ago. I'm also diving into the DSA, algo, stuff like that. Like, what should be my approach to learn JavaScript, React, Node, or DS, algo? Like, what should be the approach?
Again, right, it depends what you are learning it for. If you are just solving 500 lead code questions to like have that cool star, maybe that's a good thing, but I don't know. The language itself doesn't have too much to do with the concepts of DS and algo, right? You can take DS and algo, implement it in whatever language that you need to like work with. So if your aim is to learn JavaScript and DS and algo, initially keep them separate. You can learn DS algo concept and then implement them using JavaScript. But they're not one and the same thing. Like they have different reasons and you do different things with them. So again, like know why you're doing something and then proceed. Like don't try to like mix too much up front and like, I don't know, like, yeah, just have a plan.
Yeah, so that's really true. So you should have a reason for learning anything. So Param,
yeah.
So did you get a chance to come across with WebAssembly? Like what's the state of that? That is a question.
Yeah, there has been a lot of buzz about it, but honestly, I haven't tried that, so I can't comment on it. But I believe anyone else can. Maybe Charlie and Ankush can comment on it.
I've played with it a little bit because I was reading a book that a friend of mine recommended, and he's doing a lot of WebAssembly stuff. I think it's interesting, but I don't really. I want to look more into it because I think there are applications where it is going to be useful, but I don't see it replacing JavaScript at all. JavaScript is still the language of the web, and then there are things that will kind of like build like additions with using WebAssembly. But yeah, for me, it's more being interested into what it can bring to the web, but I don't see it as something that is going to replace JavaScript. So sometimes it scares me when I see these opinions because I'm like, people, don't freak out. You don't have to go and learn. Like your job is not over. Like you can still do JavaScript. But yeah, I was playing around with it to convert. I think it was a C library that was compressing PNGs and trying to kind of like load that in JavaScript, and that was just like tinkering a little bit to know what it's about. And the syntax has already changed from when I started looking at it a few years ago. So I think it's also something to be careful about is like when you look at a technology very early on, sometimes what you learn is not going to be like when it's changing really too fast. When you go back to it a few, like maybe even just 2 years later, it would have already changed as they are kind of like maturing the technology. So yeah, there's a few cool examples of things that can be done with WebAssembly. So if anybody is interested in that, like you should do some research because it's interesting, but I don't see it. Your JavaScript job is safe for now.
Cool. I think on that part, I think that is an interesting question. What should be my choice? Being a front-end engineer or a full-stack JavaScript engineer? So Ankush, Parminder, any suggestion?
Yeah, I'd like to answer that because it's a very controversial topic, and because I have been to a lot of companies, and there comes a time when your manager will come to you, hey, do you want to be a backend developer as well? Do you want to be a full stack developer as well? Because I have been primarily a front-end developer all my life, and sadly there are very less companies or the companies which are at a good level, like at Flipkart or at Revolut that I've worked, they have like proper front-end developer teams of like 13 people, 20 people. And but at smaller companies, you'll definitely get into the situation, your manager asking you to be get into backend or get into full stack development in order to grow into your career. And that's something I would disagree on. I don't think you need to be a backend developer to excel in your journey for being a front-end developer. It's obviously it's a personal choice. I do backend. I've been full stack developer all my initial 2 years of my career, I was in a very small startup. I actually worked on PHP, and I worked on one of his frameworks, a framework called as Laravel, and I still miss that period. I worked on the LAMP stack at that time. That was really popular. And but yes, I still do it for my personal projects. And nowadays you have these serverless things coming up. I really love that Firebase thing, platform as a service. So yes, in order to build an application, you don't need to, if you don't have time, you don't need to learn backend technologies. But of course, learning doesn't harm at all. You need to learn having a good picture, in your career. And tomorrow, if you want to be an engineering manager, obviously you need to learn the backend technologies. But for people who are starting into this career of front-end development as a career path, I would say, don't get discouraged about, you need to learn full stack development in order to in order to earn a good salary, let's say. So you can still be a front-end developer and still find, a place that value the front-end development. And but yes, if you want to be a full stack developer, there's more to learn, and it's very hard to keep up with the front-end technologies, I would say. And even if you do like front-end well, even that's good enough. But learning full stack is always, learning more things. So if you are into a very beginning kind of situation and you're choosing between whether I should go full stack versus front-end, I would say go for learn one thing first and do it well. And then obviously there's like a choice of moving on to full stack, especially in smaller startups. So that's my take on this.
That's a good takeaway. So there is one more interesting question. I don't know the name. It says anonymous. So is DSA is only for interviews?
Very nice question. I mean, this statement is partially true. Yes, unless you are working in like Google.
No, so what's your take, Charlie and Ankush, on this?
Well, personally, I know that when I look into it, it's for interviews. Otherwise, when I spend time on it, it is. But I was trying to read more about really how React works and how their diffing algorithm works and stuff like that. And this is where I told myself, this is actually where you would use it on the job. It's just that in my career, I've, worked on like different roles, different projects, different sizes of applications, different frameworks. And I never really needed to know it. Like it never stopped me from doing anything. That's why I was thinking, I study it when I know that I want to interview somewhere. But then when I was trying to understand a lot more about React, I realized, that people who do work on the framework probably have had discussions around what type of algorithm should we use to be like building this. And I was thinking, if I wanted to create a smaller version of React as a side project just to really understand how it works, I would probably have to go and understand more about algorithms to decide which one would I pick and things like that. So to me, it's either interviews or personal interest when I'm trying to learn more about something. But I'm sure there's jobs that actually require you to know it. I don't know which ones, but yeah.
So Ankush, how you take it?
Yeah, I mean, I have to use DS algos at my job here at Amazon. So it was helpful to know them. So apart from that, I also feel, it depending on what your nature of job is, knowing DS and algos, it helps you think about a problem by putting different things together and understanding some systems, like just how to understand how your browser works. If you don't know a lot of concepts that are like people think of DS algo as this like hard thing, which has a syllabus of like these 100 algorithms and like 200 data structures or whatever. Like you can start off with very basic stuff and build up slowly on your knowledge base. Like you don't have to do DSA just for the purpose of giving an interview. So it helps to keep you sharp. It helps you like to think a few solutions. Like even though I was a front-end engineer at Hotstar, over there for like certain systems that I built, some aspects of DS algo came in handy, of like deciding how to like partition some decision making, how to like maybe short circuit a few calls early. Like it helped in like thinking about a problem, even though like I may not have implemented a full on heap there. It helped me in thinking like what are some paths that you can take in your product that helps get results quickly. So I am in favor of spending a little bit time on DS algos. Also, from an interview or from a company perspective, you have a lot more jobs open up to you, and you're not restricted by which categories of interviews you can give. So I like to like have 100% of the developer market open to me than just trying to go after a particular section.
Cool. So I think we got our answer why we need DS algos. Cool. So I think there is one more technical question on a lot of jargons, which is becoming trendy now, right? The micro front end, the mono repo. So how you guys see it, right? So is it really good or bad?
I have used mono repo at Swiggy, and I think we use something called as Learner, which is really popular. And it didn't work out really well in the end because I believe it still needs more improvement. It's just a mess in the end. It needs to be done in the right way. Still, it needs to mature upon. And yes, I mean, having one repository and, GitHub issues, they all get mixed up. I personally didn't have a good experience with it. But yes, if there must be bigger companies who are using it and in a proper way. So it of course, there are pros and cons of it, but I found cons to be more than the pros. So that's my take on that.
So what Charlie and Ankush experience with these trendy stuffs?
I would agree that there's pros and cons for both. I worked on both, and it's also a discussion we've been having recently at Netlify because we have a monorepo. And I think we have started the conversation around like at what point should we restart thinking our architecture? Does it make sense to leave it a monorepo? Like how many lines of code do we want to reach until we actually do break it, and how do we break it when it happens? But yeah, then you have the issues of when I've worked on macro front ends, you want to make sure that then you have a system to make sure that your front ends have the same framework or the same structure, so that if people want to change team, they don't end up in a new repo that is completely different. And you have this conversation where it's like, well, what if a team wants to try a new tool? Do we have to wait and agree for all the other teams to try that tool too? And you have if the issues in the end end up being more organizational than code, but also in terms of code, managing your dependencies. If you have a component that uses a certain version of a tool and you import it in another part of the app, and you have had these issues where it started becoming, we almost regretted going into macro front ends. So I like the pros and cons. It's very interesting conversations. But again, I think knowing when to do one and when to do the other and why is something where you can't have a clear-cut answer. If there was one, there would be no debate anymore. It would be...
Good. So Ankush, I think I have one more interesting question, which came up here. Will web development be still there after 5 years with a lot of rise in automation?
That's an interesting question. I mean, here's the thing, right? If you're worrying about whether you should invest in learning for the job, I would say don't worry, because as I said, things will gradually fade out if they have to, and you can always like do course correction as things are starting to become unpopular. But I'm not sure how you're comparing web automation with a user experience for a regular human being. Maybe that question needs a little more details on what they're trying to ask.
Okay, maybe so with a similar line, what you see a role of Copilot now, right?
Yeah.
Became popular.
Yeah, here's the thing, right? jQuery became popular at one time. Bootstrap became popular at another. It's not like when things become a new standard, that is the new baseline and new expectation. Like give the user a pre-Bootstrap kind of an app, and they'll immediately reject your company saying, what is this 1990s app? Like people and user base now has expectations because everybody else is doing it. So as Copilot becomes common, that will become the baseline. Like things that took you 10 days to roll out a feature, the new baseline will become you have to do it in 2, you have to do it in 1, because you have these new wonderful tools at your disposal. You learn them, deliver the baseline code, and then on top of it, whatever is your creative edge as a developer or as the employer, whatever. So it'll only change the expectations, but like it's not going to do your job for you. Like you still have to make a lot of decisions.
Param, you would like to add something? I mean, you saying
yes, I would like to say that the people who are developing Copilot are also developers. So there would be like, as Ankush mentioned, new doors open, but the thing is that you need to be clear with the programming. So none of us, learned JavaScript right away. We also went through, in a computer science degree, we learned C, C++, any one OOPS language, object-oriented language, and then we moved on to a language of our choice, which happened to be, JavaScript. So the learning will never learning never will hurt, basically. And there'll always be, something that you need to work on. So as mentioned, Ankush had a really nice analogy about, how Bootstrap became, or jQuery became obsolete, but it opened doors to new other technologies. So it's just that you as developers have to adapt to the change. That's it.
So there is one question by Kavya. So I'm laughing already. Why JavaScript is impossible to understand? Is it true?
I see the sentiment of why is it coming across that way, because as I mentioned, it is a quirky language and it is a different language. And I see why I see JavaScript being a different language as a benefit, compared to rest of the other languages. It has, functional programming built into it. And, the variable hoisting is, for example, very much, dissented by a lot of people. But on the other hand, variable hosting is one of the coolest features of JavaScript, because it lets you define the functions at the very bottom and use them in the above. So many people don't like that, and which is why we have TypeScript adoption in it. So I'm talking in the lingo of Kyle Simpson's here. He is very much a big advocate of using pure JavaScript instead of TypeScript. So, but I see his point, why you shouldn't use arrow functions instead of the normal plain functions, because it helps you in debugging. It helps you. The this operator is a really good thing, but it's being very much disregarded by a lot of people, and which is why we now have a lot of adoption. So community in other side, is kind of corrupting JavaScript. And yes, it is a different language. It is going to be difficult, but eventually you'll see the benefits of it, and they are really helpful, to learn. It's really good, I would say, to invest time in learning JavaScript. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think the short answer there for Kavya is when you are coming across hard concepts, maybe you have to look into if you are spending time to understand them before moving on, because a lot of time people hit a roadblock and then they decide, okay, we are just going to learn something else. And then slowly you just have a learning journey, which is full of gaps. And then when you see it on a macro level, you've learned something which you don't understand. So maybe it's time to dissect things a little bit more and learn things a little bit more deep and seriously. And you'll see that the impossible will change to difficult to sometimes difficult.
So one thing I think which is trending recently, I mean, I'll take that question, that solid.js, has anybody got a chance to?
No, I haven't.
No. Okay.
I looked at it briefly.
So any opinion about it? That is a question.
Oh, any my opinions. I don't think that I would build a production application with it yet. I think they only just released their first major version. So, I don't think it's I wouldn't rebuild Netlify on Solid. That is for sure. But I think it's interesting to look into it because it is one of the no virtual DOM framework, but in the syntax, it's quite similar to React in the sense that you have a create effect, function, but instead of use state, they have create signal. So they just call things a little bit differently. But I just wrote a quick to-do app just to learn the main concepts of how to use state and context and all of that. And I wrote it pretty fast because it reminded me of React. So there's a few things that are different between Signal and React, but the fact that their syntax is similar means that I got started pretty fast. So I'm interested in learning more. Their documentation is sometimes not complete yet neither. So you can see that it's a growing framework, and it goes back to our conversation before around like, if you start using a framework, make sure there's enough support in the community around it. That's why I'm saying maybe, you know, it's not ready yet for big production stuff. But it's something I'm interested in, and I see a lot of interest in the community as well around it. So it's the type of framework where I will kind of like keep following on it a little bit, but yeah, it seems pretty interesting.
Cool. So I think with this, I'll just have one question. I would like all of you to put your thoughts on that. Like what you see, how you see JavaScript in coming years. Like what's the scope or the future of JavaScript in coming years?
I mean, I see a lot of cool new features getting added to JavaScript that brings us closer to having to use fewer libraries. But the basics are going to stay the same. It's going to be a fast prototyping language that is going to run the web. New frameworks, new libraries will get built around them. There'll be new transpilers. There'll be like new paradigms of the language. Again, it's basically going to give you slightly better features and more productivity, cutting down developer development time. So yeah, business as usual.
So Charlie, what's your thought? Like, what will be the scope of JavaScript in future, and how you see it?
Yeah, I think I'm always following what kind of new web APIs we're going to have access to. I think lately I've been looking in what Google has been doing with Project Fugu, and they have a bunch of new web APIs to kind of bring native capabilities to the web. And I've been following that also because as part of the Google Dev Experts group, we talk about it a lot. And I kind of want to see, you know, what are the new things that we're going to be able to build with web APIs. But then one of the things I was interested in is, well, a bit of the mix of WebAssembly and JavaScript. I want to see where that is going and what we're going to be, what can we do, you know, like even more than now. But yeah, I think I'm following what's new without being too caught up in it neither. But yeah, I'm interested in what new things we can build.
Yes, JavaScript is going to be there, you know, for the next decade. I hope there would be some transpilers on top of it, perhaps. But learning JavaScript will open a lot of doors for you, you know, for people who are thinking of learning JavaScript. It's already, you know, so much versatile. We can do, you know, augmented reality with it. We can do IoT with it. There are some missing features. Yes. For example, I really would love to have like a web authentication thing, like a fingerprint kind of login that will replace our login forms, or something like, you know, web APIs, which are kind of missing, like doing AR, augmented reality. It's always, you know, the comparison is made between a native experience versus a web experience. So yes, it is going to be there. The community is really supportive and we have seen it evolve. The future is not bleak. It is there.
Yeah.
Patro, what's your view? What's going to happen? What's going to be next in JavaScript?
Asking me also. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. So I echo with like all of you, right? And JavaScript is going to stay, and there are a lot of new frameworks, libraries which will be keep on coming. And sometime it's our choice, right? What we want to learn. I mean, it's not always necessary I have to learn everything, right? I like what Ankush has put it, right? There should be a purpose behind your learn. So there will be a lot of tools, a lot of frameworks which will be keep on flowing. We can learn based on our interest and requirement. And I see especially on the machine learning side, right, and on the IoT side, there are still a lot of scope on JavaScript to be there, because if you still see JavaScript, it's more of an web heavy, because web is currently putting a direction where JavaScript is going, right? But I see there are a lot of potential on the back end, on the machine learning and IoT things also. So I see those will be the interesting areas where JavaScript will evolve. Yeah, that's my thought. So guys, don't stop learning JavaScript. So one advice to the guys who is learning JavaScript, like how it take it, like if you're moving from other language to JavaScript, or coming new to the JavaScript, or you're a student, like how to take it, like how to take your learning journey in JavaScript. Like to answer this, like we'll summarize our debate today.
Like I said before, right? Start with the MD and docs. They already have like paths laid out. If you just go and type MD and learn JavaScript, they like give you the exact path that you need to take. So it'll cut down on a lot of noise. The other thing is like learn, and develop. Right? Don't wait to like learn everything and reach that perfect like moment in your life when you suddenly one day will wake up and say, I know JavaScript, and then I will build that amazing project that I always thought about. Like whatever you have learned, develop something of value. Like I said, like build an app that you can give to people. Nothing is going to stop you from like going back and refactoring it. And by the way, there are a lot of lessons to be learned when you refactor your existing code, and you'll grow with time. So don't wait for like an auspicious moment and one day you will say, okay, like I come across like so many people saying, yeah, I am learning JavaScript and then I will make this app. And they keep learning for like 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, I don't know, like, and then I have never seen their app up until today. So immediately like start off with like Netlify is an amazing, and I'm not saying this because Charlie's here. Like if you join realdevsquad.com, that it's a baseline requirement for people to learn how to deploy basic apps on Netlify. They make it very simple. You have to connect your main branch with Netlify and have continuous deployment there. Like just start building stuff as you learn. Like nothing stops you from going back and refactoring. So please don't do this mistake of like waiting for these auspicious moments. And then other thing I would say is get yourself the You Don't Know JavaScript book series. Like obviously there is no perfect resource out there, but these books, the reason I like them first for like Indian people, especially, you know, when you don't have power in your house or Wi-Fi goes out or whatever, the hard books are still there. I remember I used to read those books at night. So if I don't sleep and I end up staying awake for like 1 or 2 hours, I learn JavaScript. And if I get bored, I would end up sleeping and I would have a nice sleep. So it was a win-win situation for me. Yeah, but that book gives you like a good kind of like a 70-80% of what you would probably like use in your day-to-day job. So get those books and get on MD, and like those will be my 2 resources I will recommend.
Well, first of all, I do agree with Ankush on the like build, because that's what I do when I learn something new. I don't read, for example, when I started learning React, I didn't read the full documentation until I started building something. It was more like, oh, I want to build this. And then as I want to add feature to a small project I'm building, I'm looking at the syntax on how to add that feature in. So at the same time I'm learning, but I'm also putting that in practice, and that works for me. But this is where my tip or, you know, my insights would be is to figure out how you prefer to learn as well. Some people learn better by watching videos, so you can, you know, watch like front-end masters video, they're really good. Or, you know, you can, some people write like learn more by writing blog posts or reading blog posts. So you have like Smashing Magazine, CSS Tricks, and probably a lot of others. And some people learn more by listening to podcasts all the time, and you know, lots of different resources. So I think it's also about like what medium works better for you, and then definitely build. That's how I've learned most of my things. If I just read something and I don't put it in practice, it's probably gone the day after. So whereas when you type it, I remember, maybe it's visual memory, but like when I type it and I can go back to it as well. When you have, you know, you commit your repos and stuff, you can easily go back to what you built. And if you can write a blog post at the same time, then you also have knowledge you can show, and you can refer to your own things later on as well. So that would be my way. But.
Yes. So I learned JavaScript through multiple sources, and I wish I had these resources earlier. So one big shout out I would like to recommend to any new person who wants to learn JavaScript, not necessarily for building apps, not necessarily for front end, but for, let's say, for learning backend or, you know, just normal JavaScript. I would highly recommend Front-End Masters, and especially the course of Kyle Simpson, who is the author of You Don't Know JS. definitely I would say go for it. It's a big course and it's a bit expensive as well, but in the end it's just so much worth it, and you'll actually see the benefits of JavaScript. You'll see the good parts of JavaScript rather than saying it like it's impossible to understand. You'll actually understand why those difficult bits are there in place, and you start seeing the value of it. So yeah, Frontend Masters, and there's egghead.io. These are some good resources. The other I would say is Medium articles. Like these days, YouTube is built with YouTube has so many playlists around it. Udemy courses are there. So yeah, these are the main popular sources, but Kyle Simpson, I highly recommend. And You Don't Know JS book series, of course.
All right, everyone. This was super interactive discussion. Those questions which were not answered, you can join our Slack community and you can post your questions there, and other folks in the community can answer your questions. Do check out the career page of Recro. You might find something there for yourself, and do give us a follow on social media if you want to stay updated with events like these. On that note, thank you so much to all the panelists for joining us today. Really appreciate the time and efforts that you guys have put in, and to all the audience for joining us. I hope to see you guys in the next session, and thank you so much once again, guys. Have a good day ahead.